Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Soul Sessions with Deborah and Rob Maldonado.
Nice to be here. Yes.
Yeah.
Good to see you guys.
I am so excited about our next topic, continuing our series on Eastern spirituality and the wisdom of the East, bringing in some practical application to our modern world. And we're talking today about the 3 pitfalls of non-attachment. Everyone talks about non-attachment.
Yeah.
You've heard it before. So we're going to dive deep into this.
Yeah, it's a beautiful practice and it's very useful, very relevant to today's world. But before we get going, I'd like to give a shout out to all our fans, of course, people that listen to our podcast, but also our students in the coach training programs. We love you guys. Level 1, level 2, the master's program, incredible people that we're working with. And level 3, the spiritual teacher training program. These students are really why we get up in the morning and why we do what we do. And also our team who, without your support, guys, we would not be able to do what we do. So thank you so much.
Yes, you make our life wonderful and help us express our purpose.
Yes.
So do you want to start with the story?
Let's start with a story, which is more of a riddle or a koan, if you will. Nobody knows exactly who wrote this. Sometimes it's attributed to the Buddha, sometimes to Tolstoy, so all over the place. But it's a great story.
So a man is walking through the wilderness and he stumbles upon a tiger. He runs, but soon comes to the edge of a cliff. And so, desperate to save himself, he climbs down a vine and is dangling over the precipice. As he hung there, 2 mice appear from a hole, and they start gnawing on this vine as he's hanging there. Suddenly, he notices on the vine a wild strawberry. He plucked it and ate the strawberry. It was incredibly delicious. Wow. So does he live or die? We don't know.
Yeah, as you see, not much of a story, but more of a kind of a visual pun or situation that kind of presents a dilemma. You have somebody dangling from this vine with a ferocious tiger up on the cliff, ready to pounce on him if he climbs back up. But also time's running out because the mice, and in some of the stories, it's a black mice and a white mouse, kind of gnawing at the vine, meaning he's about to fall into the precipice. And then the strawberry, of course, the fruit, the sweetness,
the material
of life,
rewards of life.
Yes.
And the precipice is the unknown.
The unknown, yeah, and also the limited time that we have in this life. But I wanted to talk about the kleshas, meaning the hindrances outlined in yoga philosophy that relate to the story, relate to this philosophical conundrum that we're in this life, and to see how they fit into the parable there.
So what's where the kleshas are the hindrances? Based
The
on
hindrances
yoga
or
philosophy?
obstacles, people often talk about what blocks them. You can think along those lines. What
That's
stops
a
us?
klesha.
Yeah, what stops us from being enlightened, from being happy, from reaching our goals? All those things, and this wisdom. I mean, to me, the fact that human beings were able to figure some of these things out so early on, thousands of years ago, without the technologies and
then
the
we seem to
computers.
have forgotten them. The mass population has seemed to have forgotten these very simple truths. Yeah.
Well, they're still around, so that's
We're
we
reminding you.
focus on the good stuff. Definitely.
So number one, what would be? What's the first klesha?
Yeah. So the first klesha, and I'm really kind of presenting them in reverse, but to me they make more sense this way. First of all, we have the will to live, which is a kind of counterintuitive. We would think, well, the will to live is great. We want to
What's wrong with that?
augment that
Yeah.
and bring it forth, right? Like we see in the story, the guy is running from the tiger, meaning he wants to live. There's nothing wrong with this. But it's a klesha, it's a hindrance in that it puts us in a survival mode.
So when we say these things, it's not when they're negative or they're bad, but more that they interrupt us knowing our true nature.
That's right. They're a challenge to us.
Okay, challenge. And
Yeah.
not leading us to joy. Yeah, they kind of take us. They cause suffering.
They can, exactly. They can cause suffering if we don't understand them. And we'll get that.
So there's nothing wrong with
end.
the will to live. Like the will to live is bad. It's a hindrance. Just having that desire to live can hinder our spiritual growth.
Yes, and the reason I present it backwards is because this is the root of it. In other words, what comes out of that will to live that's so powerful. And if you notice in nature, every living thing has this desire and impetus to live, to survive, right?
Yeah, like if animal gets caught in a trap, it will gnaw off his arm to survive. So it's that survival instinct in all of us.
Very powerful. But it leads in human life, in human affairs, it leads to this ego.
That's number 2.
That's number 2. The second hindrance is number 2. And it's the sense of I. Because if we ask, well, who is the one that wants to live? It feels like it's coming from my body, from my mind body, which is then generates this sense of me or I.
So the identification with the body creates this, because there is this kind of awareness in us that is different than the awareness in you on some level, like a personal awareness that ultimately is the birth of the ego.
It's the birth of the ego because if we ask, well, why does the body want to survive? It's designed to make sure that you survive, right? That your body survives as an individual, and that you make it through to pass on your genes or just to live your life to its fullness. So, but it begins with that will to live. Then in the mind there arises a sense of ego.
And then the will to live also and survive can be social as well.
Because if you get into how does this hinder us, isn't it a good thing to have an ego? And for survival, of course it does. It is great to have an ego. But the way it hinders us is that we start to over-identify with it. We start to believe that's all there is to me.
So the body's
ego.
a hindrance because we have to feed it, we have to take care of it, it ages, it gets sick. And it doesn't mean we should get rid of the body. We want to have the body's not bad in itself, but the identification with this body and having that gives us a limited idea or causes limitation and suffering.
Yes, and the next 2 actually get to the suffering piece.
Okay, I want to get to the suffering part.
Yes, because then that sense of I, the way we perceive then the environment is through this lens of attraction, which is number 3, and repulsion, which is number 4. Meaning this duality. We want to move towards the pleasant, the good, the light,
The pleasurable.
Sustenance, comfort. And
Beauty.
we want to move away from pain, from danger, from cold and heat, from extremes. So that duality is the way we survive in the world. That we're always seeking the good, right? The pleasure principle that Freud talks about. It's very powerful in us, and it helps us survive in that instinctually we know what's good for us in a sense.
And, even a one-cell organism, they've done tests that it has that same attachment, that if you put like something hot or unpleasant, it moves away from it. Like it moves away from what's unpleasant or feels uncomfortable. Yes. So it's like in us, even as a one-cell organism, every organism on the planet, including our body as an organism of the world, has that desire to move away from suffering.
Yeah, and in the story, of course, the the white and the black mice or mouse are these two elements, attraction and repulsion.
Because they're both equal in a way. Because to be repulsed against something and to be attracted to something, where you're just like, I'm just going to not be repulsed by anything, but you can't have attraction without repulsion because it's a dual world. If you like up, the opposite of up is down, good and bad, nice, mean, that duality. So is the opposite of something. When you're attracted to something, it's like you bring the opposite with you. Is that what you're saying?
That's a layer of it, right? And that's the beauty of these wisdom traditions, that they're bringing so many layers of knowledge and wisdom to the mind by you simply examining them. So the koan, or the story, the parable that we read, this attraction towards the strawberry, meaning we want to taste the sweetness of life and enjoy it while we're alive, right? Again, there's nothing wrong with that from the ego perspective. If we believe we're the ego, then we come to the conclusion that, hey, the best I can do is eat, drink, and be merry while I'm alive, because tomorrow we die.
You're describing my early years when I was single.
Yeah, my college years were very much based on that philosophy too. It is basically kind of the natural conclusion that we come to when we identify as the body.
And if we're not drinking and being merry, we think something's wrong. So we're seeking it. And so we have the will to live, number 1, the ego arising out of that, 3, attraction, 4, repulsion, and 5 is ignorance. So tell me about ignorance.
Yeah, so ignorance is considered like the mother lode of suffering and of this hindrance, because ignorance, well, on both sides, right? If we're ignorant of the nature of the mind-body, meaning we don't understand our craving and why we're after pleasure and pushing away pain, we're acting instinctually and just kind of creating more of this dualistic existence.
Almost as if the intelligence of a one-cell organism, that it's just reacting. And then we can go into the longer, deeper idea of conditioning and how we actually basically keep conditioning ourselves in early life to react, and we're just kind of stuck in that.
That's it, right? A conditioned life is not a free life, because you're acting out of the circumstances of your environment. In other words, whatever environment you were born into, it's going to tell you who you are and what's possible for you for the rest of your life if you're just acting on that conditioning.
So what you're saying is, even if you have like this idea or inspiration, the force of conditioning can lock you in. If you're ignorant, you can have this great, like, I have this big goal, but we're attached to get away from, our current circumstances, but we're so locked in if we're attached. We're going to talk about it.
Yeah. And on the other side, ignorance of higher knowledge, meaning what is possible for us with the consciousness that we have. In the great epic from India, the Mahabharata, the king Yudhishthira says, one of the most remarkable things about human life is that every day we're surrounded by death, yet we act as if we were going to live forever.
Yeah, that's true.
We don't notice, or we don't take notice, or we don't take the lesson that our time is limited, that we need to use this life for this higher life or higher purpose in us, the spiritual calling, right? In other words, we spend it in that dualistic seeking pleasure, because tomorrow we die, therefore I need to get as much pleasure and much sensory stimulation as possible before I die, and trying to avoid pain.
And the ignorance too, wouldn't it be that because it's the world is in constant motion, that there's no way to hang on to play? Like, the ignorance is that this thing is going to last. We're going to, once I get this goal. I'm going to feel oh great, and then that happiness lasts forever. Is that an ignorance too? This idea that there's something solid about that we can grasp in the world that can make us happy?
Yeah, certainly. If you look at our experience of pleasure, it's very temporal. It's very fleeting. So once you taste the strawberry, it lasts for a few seconds, and then you need another strawberry. And if you eat too many, then you get sick. Therefore, it leads us to the opposite always, to suffering, to pain, essentially.
Well, when I was younger, my family used to make fun of me because I would eat the ice cream really slow, like lick it slowly, and my other siblings would eat it so fast. I'm like, oh, Debbie, look at how she... And I'm like, I'm savoring this. It lasts longer. So it's that idea that we want to like make it last. But even then, there's still, it doesn't last. So that's the ignorance of something, the permanence of the world. And
Yes.
and that even having that experience of pleasure reaches a deeper part of us that can keep us happy forever.
Yes, and it's simply these wisdom traditions are simply saying these elements, these natural, instinctual elements in us are what keep us in that conditioned, limited state of mind. And therefore we suffer because we're always looking to create pleasure and abundance and creativity and all that's good stuff. But the dualistic principle is that when you define goodness, you're defining badness. When you define beauty, you're defining ugliness. Therefore, you're bringing the opposite into existence just by you desiring something good. You're bringing something bad into the world as well.
Well, having a desire is admitting that you don't have it already, isn't it?
That's
sort
it.
of like
Yeah.
to want something means I don't have it.
That's
So
right.
you're caught up in that loop. So let's go to the 3 pitfalls of non-attachment. What are the pitfalls? Well, non-attachment is the way we can free ourselves from this ignorance, or to
Yeah, that's
to
a good way to
suffering?
think about it. It's one of the main techniques mentioned in the wisdom traditions as a way of freeing our mind from the dualistic tendency of conditioning, or the dualistic conditioning power that is in the environment. So how does non-attachment work? It is essentially saying that every action that we take leaves an imprint on us because of that desire that we have to either gain something from it, gain pleasure,
the positive or negative,
or to avoid pain. So if we succeed, it increases that behavior for us. In other words, we're prompted to repeat that behavior. And if we fail at it, in other words, if it doesn't give us what we want, then we tend to drop that behavior. So over the years, I mean, imagine how many behaviors and how many actions do we take from the time that we're born up to this moment. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions and millions upon all these small actions are leaving this conditioning imprint on us. Meaning, by the time we get to be adolescents, we're very much conditioned already into reacting to the environment in a certain way.
like simply in school, to be nervous about a test, or to be nervous about getting our grades, to be not in trouble with our parents. Those kind of, I know I'm going to get in trouble for this, and I'm going to be punished, and that negative feedback we get from, or speaking up and the parents are like shushing you, and you have a negative reaction, and they're like, well, I better not speak up anymore. And so we end up not really having a choice in our life. We end up thinking we're making choices, but we're actually acting out of that attachment, out of that conditioning.
Yes.
So can attachment be like conditioning? Would be a way to talk about conditioning? It's really an attachment?
I would say that attachment sets us up for conditioning.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because we want something and we want to hold on to it. That predisposes us to, when we get it, it leaves a positive imprint on us, meaning that we're going to repeat whatever helped us get it. Or if we don't get it, or if it's aversive, in other words, if we get punished by it, by that moving towards it, then it reduces the likelihood of that action repeating itself. So in other words, it's molding and shaping the way we act. And it literally will determine in a predictable way how a person will act throughout their life. It's that deterministic principle that you can determine or you can predict how people will act if you understand conditioning well.
Didn't they say a good predictor of future behavior is past behavior?
That's right. That's right. Most people, because most of us are conditioned by our past, we're very predictable.
So we get into these cycles, like same relationships, same money problems, same career things that hold us back, same friendship issues, family issues. Like it just feels like, why does this keep happening to me?
That's right.
That's always seemed, well, this is why. So the key to free ourselves.
Yeah. So if attachment is the binding force, non-attachment is the freeing power.
I love that.
In us. So non-attachment simply says this: you can take the action, and it's recommended you continue to act. In other words, we don't want to stop acting, and we'll see why, as one of the pitfalls will show. We continue to act, but we drop the attachment to the results of the action.
Which is counterintuitive to how we've been conditioned.
Yeah.
So basically, conditioning locks us in, and this non-attachment unlocks us from that conditioning.
It is the key to our freedom, non-attachment, action with non-attachment. So again, we're presenting in a simple way, but this is the best way to understand it. That when you take an action, let's say you're going to work. If you're going to work to get the paycheck, you're saying, I'm going to work to get the money, meaning the reward.
Which most people do. They don't even got to work for free, right?
Yes. But if you're attached to it, meaning, again,
you're only going, like it's almost...
It's a mental decision. It's not inherent in the action. It's us who get attached to the result of the action.
So someone who says, I'm stuck in my corporate job and I can't leave because I don't know how I'm going to survive, they're very attached to that paycheck. And so they're taking action for the result, for the reward, for the paycheck, but they're not really enjoying the action.
Right. So,
which is suffering.
The question is this: can you go to work without the attachment to getting paid? Now, it doesn't mean you won't get paid, right? As long as you show up, the results will still be there. You'll complete the work, you'll get paid, on and on. But do you need to be attached to getting the money for that action? That's the question. And the answer is no. You can act and still do your work, still receive the money, but not be attached to getting the money.
Not feel like this height, it's payday, like everybody's working for the weekend. Remember that song?
That's right.
It's that kind of, I can't wait till Friday and
yes.
TGIF.
So let's proceed, because the good stuff will come out through the...
Okay, I'm ready for the good stuff.
Through the pitfalls.
Pitfall number one.
Yes, the pitfall number one is that people confuse it for detachment. So non-attachment doesn't mean not caring. Detachment would mean I don't care. I'm detached from that activity. So I don't care about the money. I'm just going to, do my work and go home and be miserable or whatever. But it's that not caring. In other words, I don't care how good my work is, or if I'm enjoying it or not enjoying it, or doing a good job or not. I'm just not going to care. I'm detached.
So in other words, like they say that in the corporate, most people are actively disengaged with their work.
Yes.
Right. So that would be a detached. But they think they're non-attached.
Yeah, exactly. They've checked out. They've checked out of the procedure. They're just going through the motions. They get paid, whatever, but they're not really living in the moment and enjoying it or doing the best work.
Well, and think about any other goal. So I know we work with a lot of people start their businesses. I've known many entrepreneurial friends, and sometimes when things get hard, they sort of like say, well, I'm not going to be attached to the result, but they kind of, they're still taking action, but it's almost like they're resenting the action in a way, and they just don't even expect a result, or I don't care, you know.
Well, it's like when people used to come up to us and say,
"Oh yeah,
I don't want a relationship," you know.
Yeah.
Then why are you coming up to us and
I know.
and saying it?
I'm not looking for a relationship right now, they used to say. And I said, well, why did you come here and tell me that? Like, why did you find that?
Yeah, it must be important.
Yeah, there's a lot of energy here. So you have a lot of energy. So it's like this energy that you say I'm detached, but there's, like you said, it's like a defense or pushing away.
A pushing away, exactly. It's a rejection of the goal with the intention of defending themselves, meaning keeping themselves safe somehow.
In this status quo almost, like I'm not even going to try to get a relationship, or I'm not even going to try to get clients or build a business because it's not working. So I'm just going to be detached, and it's more of moving away from it in a very like defensive, almost I don't know, like anger in a way, or resentment because you didn't get what you want, so you're going to push it away, but you're still wrapped up because you think you don't care, but actually you do care. Like there's a lot of energy still there. You're actively not caring in a way.
Yeah, it's like when people have enemies. They're constantly thinking about this enemy, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's very much like they're related to them in a very powerful way, even though they consider them the enemy that they want to push away.
Like ignoring them, getting them out of their life?
It's consuming their mental activity and their emotional activity. It's the same principle. When you're caught up in pushing something away, it's got you, basically.
But you're saying I'm not attached, but they're saying detached. I'm detached from it.
Yes.
I don't care anymore. But you do care. Like you're pretending you don't care, but you really do care. Yes. So it's kind of tricky, right?
So that's one of the pitfalls. And we all fall into this. We're not saying only certain people fall in. This is the subtlety of the practice of non-attachment. Be careful with falling into detachment.
Pushing away
of things, we're saying.
Well, it's like the opposite of clinging to something. There's the pushing away.
That's right. Mm-hmm. The second pitfall is not acting or passively experiencing the situation. And here the attachment is to not acting. Mm-hmm. You're saying, well, if I don't work, or if I don't seek a relationship, if I don't date, then I won't run the danger of getting caught up in the relationship or getting caught up with the money, and therefore I'm safe.
Is it also the idea that you say everything happens for a reason, and you kind of reason away the results, and kind of like I'm non-attached, and on a conscious level you're trying to justify the results you're getting or the non-action that you're doing, and you're using the term I'm non-attached, but it's more you're not really moving forward. It's almost like the ego's trick to keep you from acting, and using a spiritual terminology to make it sound spiritual what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean the
everything
hallmark
happens in divine timing and that kind of thing.
Yeah, the hallmark of this pitfall is that the person is not taking action. In other words, they're not using all their potential to create something in the world because they're afraid of that attachment or the entanglement with life. So
these two actually, what most people think is attachment is I'm going to go for something. And so number one is detachment, which is I'm actively pushing away. And then the other one is where you feel like I'm not even going to try. So those two you're still caught up in attachment because the not trying is an action toward safety. You're still attached to something. You're still attached to safety, right?
Yeah,
self-preservation there's a subtle difference
in detachment, it's like that checking out. In passivity, it's more that you're not acting. You're attached to not taking action, and you're believing that that's going to keep you in a freedom, or a non-engaged or non-attached way.
Because the assumption is if I act, then I'll be attached.
That's right.
So I don't know how to act, so I better not act, and then I'm not attached.
Yes, because
Right?
remember, these are pitfalls for people that are practicing non-attachment.
Yeah.
So we're practicing non-attachment, but then we fall into these subtle pitfalls.
Yeah. And we all do, because we all have an ego, and and the ego loves to use these spiritual principles to get us to stay safe, and so it finds a way.
Well, Gandhi was a great practitioner of this, and so I think somebody accused him once of being passive, in a situation, and he says, "No, I'm never passive. I always take action. The only difference is I'm not attached to the result. I focus more on taking the action and opposing, the unjust laws or the unjust principles in society, whatever I'm working on, but I'm not attached to getting the results."
The action itself is the reward.
The action itself is a reward, and if you take the action, the results will be there. And we saw that he was able to liberate a whole continent or subcontinent
From the British
India.
Empire,
Yes.
one small little tiny man.
That's right. Through this power
Yeah.
of non-attachment. So the third one is that people practice non-attachment, or all of us sometimes practice non-attachment without understanding the principle of Dharma, our personal Dharma, which is our purpose. What is the purpose of your life? What are you doing here? Why are you embodied in this human skin? There's a purpose to it. Just like everything in nature has a purpose, your individual life has an individual purpose. And your task is to express that. That's your Dharma. And it can only be expressed when you find this knowledge, this higher knowledge, when you're not in ignorance, like we were talking about.
Dangling from a vine.
These obstacles, the incredible obstacles, hindrances. So what does it mean to practice non-attachment without tying it to Dharma? It means that you're often using it to get stuff. It's the people that say, okay, I'm going to practice non-attachment so I can get the relationship, or I can get the money.
So you're using spiritual techniques to get material things, which is attachment. Like you're still caught up in but it sounds nicer. Then I just got to find a relationship. It's like, well, I'm going to practice non-attachment to find that relationship. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if it doesn't have a purpose beyond just feeding the ego, satiating that hunger for pleasure, then you're really not approaching non-attachment or the practice in the way it was conceived, or the way it was, the spiritual wisdom has taught it for many thousands of years.
Yeah, I mean, this has been one of the criticisms of a lot of the kind of the spiritual but not religious people like ourselves. I mean, I consider myself certainly one of those people that would say I'm spiritual but not religious, is that we don't practice the discipline in its fullness. That we take little pieces that are convenient for us, but we don't say, well, that's too, or give me the hard parts. I'll accept that there's going to be some difficult things that I'm going to have to do if I want to do a real spiritual practice, but that I pick and choose, cherry pick the techniques or the practices.
And then our ego kind of reframes it in a way that feeds more of the ego. And if we're ignorant of that we have an ego, or ignorant of how it operates, or our patterns from the past, how it feeds that pattern, we don't even realize that we're caught up in it. I mean, so many times I remember, especially like when I was looking for a relationship, I was doing all the spiritual stuff and starting my first practice. I was, using these principles, but it was in service of that attachment. And then when I received the results, I started to feel like, okay, well, that's not it. Like that's not, happiness isn't inside those things. And so sometimes we need to start that way, don't you think? We need to start maybe practicing these principles and to attain material things. And then we say, okay, I got these things. Now, this isn't really what they meant by non-attachment. It meant it's really tied to Dharma. Like, what is my purpose beyond just acquiring people and things? Is that, wouldn't you say that was okay if people started that way?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, we all start that way.
Yeah, any practice is better than no practice. But to really gain the full effect of non-attachment, it has to be tied to Dharma, meaning if we're not acting for the result of our action, which is the motivation, right? That's what people use to motivate themselves. They say, well, if I do this difficult job, I'll get the reward, right? I'll get the recognition, the prestige, the money, whatever it is. We're acting for a particular result, and that motivates us. But we know that is the principle of conditioning right there, and we know it reduces creativity. When children are rewarded for creative endeavors, their creativity goes down because it's externalized. And that's one of the principles in conditioning as well, that the reward is coming from the outside. So the question is this: if I can't use the external reward to motivate myself, how am I going to motivate myself? Right?
Or if I don't get pleasure, if I can't have pleasure from that reward,
exactly.
Why would I act? Right? Why should, like, that's what Krishna asked. Arjuna asked Krishna, like, why should I act if I can't have the fruits of the reward?
Yeah. And Dharma then answers this question, is that in doing your higher purpose, that's your motivation, that you're expressing the fullness of your talents, your skills and you're putting it into the action, not to the results.
And that's so hard to do because we all want the result as human beings. But I know that as a coach, for me, and I'm sure this is, we teach our coaches too, is that to show up with the client and not be attached to their results, because the coach can actually get attached to their client get results, not because they care about the client as much, which they do, but because it makes them look good, and then they'll get that acknowledgement. They'll get, the client will do their package again. Like, there's a little bit of ego in there. So when you go to a coaching session with a client or working with in a service job, you're serving others, you're not really attached to their result, but you care, but it doesn't define you. So whether they have a good result or a bad result, you're doing your duty. You're acting because that's who you are. You're being someone who shares knowledge. You're being there for another person. And I find that the more non-attached I am as a coach, the better results my client gets. And the more attached I get, and early on I was so attached that it seemed to be they were always like, nothing's happening, nothing's working. And it's because I was seeing my own attachment. Would that be a good way to think about it?
Yes, because if we look at the second one, ego, I, what is happening is that through non-attachment, meaning taking action without attachment to the results, it's leaving the ego out of it. It's essentially not feeding the ego, because attachment, meaning acting for the results, is exactly where the ego arises. It's saying, I want to survive, I want to have pleasure, I want to move away from pain, and therefore it reinforces that false sense of I, which is the ego. So non-attachment, meaning simply acting out of higher purpose with no attachment to the fruits. The fruits will still be there. In other words, the results will yield because it's cause and effect, essentially. But you're not attached to it, meaning you're leaving the ego out of it.
Well, and the beauty of non-attachment, I think, is that we talked about this many times, is that we don't really know if something's good or bad. So we're making an assumption that a certain result is going to be good for us or bad for us based on past experience. So we're making this assumption that if this client gets that great result, it's going to be the best thing and it's going to be good. And the ego wants to take credit for it. But we don't know what that action is. And if the client gets a negative result or they don't get what they want and out of the coaching, it may be the best thing that ever happened to that client because maybe it makes them go deeper. You don't know. It's not your job to be in charge of their result, but being in charge of delivering and helping them and trusting that the result they get is going to be, for their own growth. Would that be a way to look at it?
Yeah.
But you're doing it out of your heart, what you know. And actually, I think you're more intuitive, you're more creative, there's more space than if your ego's involved. And then it's like so tight and inflexible and stressed about that interaction with that other person. The same thing with any relationship. You want to be open and you want that openness that brings more creativity.
Yeah, that's a whole other layer of it, right? Because then you're talking about the wisdom of non-attachment. It's leading us to self-realization, meaning realizing you are the higher self. So let's just recap then. The three pitfalls, mainly detachment, or thinking that detachment is the same as non-attachment. Detachment is not caring, and then in non-attachment, we care. Mm-hmm. We care about the action primarily. We want to take the action to its best possible conclusion.
Like your heart and soul and the emotions is still engaged in that action. It's just the result. Our heart and soul is not tied to the result.
The second one, not acting or being attached to non-action. We want to stay in action, always stay in action. It's our duty, it's our purpose, it's the way we free our mind, it's the way we undo all the past conditioning through acting.
I find that people that don't act, like for me, I ended up getting laid off from my job because it was like the universe pushing me. So even in non-action, there's something in you, your psyche will push you to or keep pushing you. It's like you can't really stay there.
And then number 3, forgetting Dharma, forgetting our true purpose, forgetting that the actual purpose of our work is to realize the self, our true self. And therefore, always remember, why are we practicing non-attachment? Not to get better results or to get the fruit down the road somewhere. The results of our actions will always be there. It's a universal principle. Whatever actions you take will yield results. But we're letting go of the attachment to the results.
Can I ask one quick question?
Sure.
I get this a lot. Can I enjoy the results?
Absolutely. I think you enjoy them better, actually, because then you're not anxious about holding on to them.
So it's okay to celebrate?
It's okay to celebrate. It's okay to cry even when things go bad. And
it doesn't need to be like a bland, neutral.
On the contrary, you're actually able then to express and bring the emotions really to the surface because you're understanding what they are, that they're not the ones that are determining what the meaning of things are.
So when you have a negative experience or something that's unpleasurable, and you have a hard emotion, you can actually use that emotion in a non-attached way to say, oh, this didn't turn out, let me examine why I feel this way. So non-attachment is also, I don't want to just push that negative result away and then keep chasing the positive. What you're doing is saying, ooh, that's interesting. Or, ooh, notice how attached I am to this. Or don't get too attached. And you're working with the pleasure again but in a way of experiencing it through higher knowledge and higher awareness.
Yes, and we're trusting again in that higher Dharma, the true self, to lead us in whatever results we get, instead of thinking, no, I want a certain result, and I'll only be happy or I'll only consider this a success if I get a certain result. It's a very limited perspective on life. Once you open it up and you say, if I'm doing my duty, I'm doing my purpose, whatever result arises from these actions, I'll take it, I'll accept it, as that's the next level for me. It's simply going to show me where I need to go.
Isn't that how all the new inventions were created, is that they just kept trying? And like Edison famously tried 1,000 times to create that incandescent light bulb. And he said, well, I learned 999 ways how not to do it. And that led me to this. So it's that non-attachment, bringing it to everything you do, that you're just working with the action. And, oh, okay, that's kind of information. The result is information versus a definition of who you are, or a life sentence, or even a sign that you can't have what you want, where the ego tries to discourage you to stop, doesn't it? When you get that negative result, the ego tops on and says, ooh, well, let's not do that again. And so it's to free yourself to keep acting freely in the world.
That's right. So non-attachment helps us overcome the hindrances of this attachment to life, the ego, the attraction and repulsion, and the ignorance of it all, because it enlightens the mind. As we take more action with non-attachment, enlightenment comes in, meaning we're understanding the true nature of the mind, the true nature of reality.
So we're welcoming whatever result comes, in a way. We're welcoming versus saying it has to be door A or door B. We're saying welcoming whatever comes, and that is, there's a lot of freedom. I think we act more creatively when we're not so attached.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Well, this series is going to continue all summer. We hope you join us. Feel free to click on the button here if you're watching us on YouTube to subscribe to our channel so you can hear and watch our videos every week. If you're watching us or listening to us on the podcast, please be sure to subscribe on Spotify, iTunes, all the major podcast providers. We would love to have you here every week, and just enjoyed this time. This is a great topic.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thanks for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.
Take care.